Okay, everybody, thank you for coming. As I was reminded by at least two people, if you look at the screen, please silence your cell phones. We got a long day ahead of us and long night, so it's important to try to keep on time here. So I just wanted to play a little video for you so you can get a sense of what today is all about.
Here's the thing that makes life so interesting. The theory of evolution claims only the strong shall survive. Maybe so. Maybe so. But the theory of competition says just because they're the strong doesn't mean they can't get their asses kicked. That's right. See, what every long shot come from behind underdog will tell you is this. The other guy may in fact be the favorite. The odds may be stacked against you, fair enough. But what the odds don't know is this isn't a math test. This is a completely different kind of test. One where passion has a funny way of trumping logic. So before you step up to the starting line, before the whistle blows and the clock starts ticking, just remember out here, the results don't always add up. No matter what the stats may say, and the experts may think, and the commentators may have predicted, when the race is on, all bets are off. Don't be surprised if somebody decides to flip the script and take a pass on yelling uncle. And then suddenly, as the old saying goes, we got ourselves a game.
So welcome everybody. I thought that was a fitting video because today's about competition and how we can stay in front of our competition. You know, we're in a constant fight these days to get work, maintain the quality level of the work, and you know, in order to grow our business and be more competitive, you know, we have to take that into account. So I just thought it would be. Is that okay? Good video? Yeah. Cool. So welcome everybody. We have a fairly long agenda today. I think I sent this out earlier. We're going to have Gene's going to speak here in a minute. We'll go through the state of the company and a short-term business plan. We'll have a break, have some more coffee, some more water, and then go through the current market conditions. Mark Levesque's going to talk a bit about the CA process, and then we're going to have David Hayden, who's one of the best legal counsels out there from Donovan Hayden, who represents us on a lot of different fronts. But he's the insurance company's preferred lawyer in many cases. Then we're going to break for lunch. The rest of the office will come in, and we have a whole afternoon agenda in front of us. Basically, this is it. We got some cool stuff going on. We have a lot of videos, hopefully, and a lot of creative stuff. When I organized this, I asked everybody to get creative. That's what our architect friends are asking of us these days, is to get creative and as Jacob knows, more sustainable. So with that, I'd like to introduce Gene. I think everybody knows Gene Bard. I've known Gene for over 30 years. I started at BR+A in 1984. So it's probably before a lot of you were born. Maybe not. But with that, here's Gene.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've never had a problem with that. Alan does what I used to do, for those of you that are old enough and have been here long enough to remember. But we'll talk more about that. But basically, We are at the crossroads right now, and as I like to talk about it, I am looking back because that's the part of the business and the part of BR+A that I know the best. And I'm going to let Alan look forward because we're trying to transition, and Alan is in charge of going forward and also with the next 5-year plan. So I'm doing the easiest part, I think, which is to tell you where we started, what we did, and where we've been for 40 years. So I started this firm in the basement of my house in Sudbury. And then I talked Arjun into working with me. And then we got a job. I did the mechanical, he did the electrical. And then we got a bigger job and we couldn't handle it all. So we talked Ted into joining us. The three of us used to work together in the same firm. And we incorporated on November 1st, 1975. Some of you know all this, it may be boring, but for those of you who came up from the Florida office and New York office, you'll learn something about the firm that you didn't know before. But it's good to see it, and I'll call it BR+A 101. The Boston office itself is located across the street. Some of you haven't been over there yet, but I think you'll be impressed what we did. Oh, yeah, that's true, thanks. Anyway, we incorporated and physically opened shop in '76 at 711 Boylston Street in Copley Square, Back Bay, Boston. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then we moved to Alston. We bought a building we don't have a picture of it, at 424 Cambridge Street, and that was very small. Those of you that were in it, we used to have those red hanging light fixtures. We had the drafting boards. It was an L-shaped garbage building. It was for sale for $299,000. I made a deal with the guy. We bought it for $219,000. The problem was Jimmy Carter was president. It was 1980, and we took a mortgage. Shows you the nerve we have. But we took a mortgage at 19.5%. But a year later, we remortgaged it down to 12 or 13. But when Jimmy Carter was president, mortgage rates were insane as compared to today. But we outgrew that very quickly, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And then we found a building on Sodersfield Road, 1320, which I thought was beautiful. It was for rent, it wasn't for sale. So I went over there, met with the accounting firm that owned it. They had just moved to Cambridge. They were not desperate, but they wanted to get rid of it. So I told them I want to buy it. They said it's not for sale. So I offered them way more than they were asking for the building, and voila, we bought it. And then we bought the building next door eventually. You guys know the history of that. 10 years ago exactly, maybe 10 and a half, we moved into the Arsenal. That's because Harvard University bought our two buildings because that's the expansion of the Western campus for Harvard. That's why we moved to the Arsenal. Harvard also owned the Arsenal. He gave us a sweetheart deal where we had a constant fixed rent for 10 straight years. That was a good deal. That unfortunately expired. It was sold to Athena Healthcare, but we got Athena Healthcare to pay us to move here. So we got money from Athena plus money from GBH for fit out, and we moved in here. And those of you that haven't seen the office, go see it before the crowd comes because we have a lot of people coming later. But I think the office looks pretty good. It's very modern. Anyone that's been in it is very impressed, and I think the people that worked on the building committee and Eric Edmond, who's on ad hoc manager, does a great job, but I think you'll be impressed by it. So we have a 15-year lease here with a 5-year option. So BR+A will be here for quite some time. 1976 is a lot different than the way it is today. For instance, to build a workstation, you know, we'd go over to Grossman's Lumber, which is out of business, and we'd buy a door. And we'd buy a sawhorse and a cover and a T-square, you know, and for $800 or less, we had a workstation. Today, you can go buy a computer, a Revit license, an AutoCAD license, and these are renewable, Microsoft license. I mean, it doesn't end, but I would say it probably costs $2,000 or $3,000. Well, it's probably light, probably $5,000 to set up a workstation today. Our professional liability insurance the first year was about $60,000. Last year to renew, we paid about $600,000 for just 1 year. that doesn't sound so out of whack because it's been 40 years, but rent, this will get you. When we moved into 711 Boylston Street, our first floor, on the 4th floor of the building on the corner of Exeter and Boylston, we paid $2 a square foot for the space. I mean, that, if you went there, you'd see that's all it was worth. But we paid $2 a square foot. But when we took the floor above, as we expanded, we paid $4 for the 5th. Then when we needed space on 6, they wouldn't give it to us. We took 7, and we paid $6. So it went from 2 to 4 to $6 a square foot in 4 years before we moved to Halston. The staff, obviously, we had, I think the next slide will show that better. Some of the terms that you guys all deal with every day, when we started in business, there was no such thing as a CM. So all your favorite contractors, Gilbane and Turner and Skanska, Skanska didn't even exist around here, but Beacon Construction, who they bought. But anyway, they were contractors. There was no such thing as a construction manager. That happened after we started business. And of course, there was no such thing as a GMP. So all that evolved, and it started to get complicated, but it's been sort of constant for a while. The new lean design and IPD and getting in bed with the contractor has all changed, and Alan will talk more about that later, but there's no doubt that we're on the cusp of a new frontier in how we work, how we're contracted, where we do the work, and how we get paid for it. And with the Revit model, as all of you know, we push the bulk of the work up front. So there has to be a whole new justification of how contracts work and how we're going to get paid, because we're doing too much work up front and less in construction documents, which we used to do. But we'll talk more about that today. This is the ownership. Erin was bothering me for a picture of the 3 founders. So I went through, unfortunately, here's a sad story, but we all moved out of the arsenal. I threw 99% of what I accumulated away. What was I going to do with it? And then I personally relocated my personal residence. So I went through 2 periods of discarding everything under the sun. So this is the only photograph I have of the 3 founders. So this was on a stockholders retreat in '93 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We were working very hard. But Steve Levin was with us, and Chris Cobley was with us, and Dan Karen, and Alan Ames. And at that time, we had about 10 shareholders. We had the 3 big plus the others. Then it took us from '78 to 2003. We survived with 3 big shareholders who started the company and 6 or 7 smaller shareholders who became principals and owners. Then in 2003, we were going ESOP, was to convert the company to employee-owned, which we sort of are now, but officially ESOP. It was all queued up. We paid lawyer fees. And then we got contacted by this engineering firm in New Jersey where Joe Witt used to hang out. I don't know where Joe's hiding. There he is. But anyway, so we got approached by Keyspan through PS&S. You all know the story. But we turned them down, and every time we turned them down, they came back. Eventually, we couldn't refuse it. So we entered what I call the dark ages. Luckily, we survived the dark ages, not because of us, because of the greed of Keyspan. So all the honchos at Keyspan sold to National Grid. They all took golden parachutes, and National Grid inherited us in addition to power plants and contracts to sell people gas and electricity. Luckily, National Grid didn't want anything to do with us, or the other engineering firms they bought, or the contractors they inherited. So National Grid tried to sell us. They couldn't sell us, so they sold us back to us. So that worked. So what we decided to do when we reorganized in 2008 was to go ahead and do a transition, a real transition. We allowed Keyspan to sort of transition us, but in 2008, when we restarted this firm, we officially transitioned. So I stepped down as president. Alan has been the president since 2008, which is 7 years now. He's gotten better almost every day, every week. You all witnessed it. He's taken more authority. He acts like he is the president, which is bravo, which is good. But we are in a transition between the old and the new. And those of you sitting in the audience know we have almost 60 shareholders. That's why right now I sort of paraphrase it as an employee-owned company, even though it's not official. We also survived because of our geographic diversity, and we succeeded over these past 40 years. Some firms only did work in metropolitan Boston. We could have done that. And we could have said, we'll only travel out to 495 or 128, which are the highways around suburban Boston. But we didn't want to do that. So we went where we thought the work was. We obviously, a large milestone was getting Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, which we were interviewed 2 or 3 times. By rights, we should have never got the job. This was a $180 million job at the time, 1.8 million square feet, brand new hospital. The biggest thing we had ever done at that time was about a $40 million hospital and a couple of $10 million hospitals. But we convinced them at the interview, and we overwhelmed them that they had to hire us. But that opened up the Hanover, New Hampshire office, and we did other work at Dartmouth College for a bunch of years, and then we closed it. In the 90s, we opened Philadelphia. Mark and Dave are here, for sure. We opened Fort Lauderdale, that closed. We opened Baltimore, that eventually closed. And we took the New Haven office, put it on wheels, and we moved it to New York. That's where the New York office came from. It was New Haven on wheels. There were 6 employees in New Haven, and all 6 relocated to New York. Unfortunately, 20 years later, there's nobody left from New Haven. The last was Ira Falk, who left us probably when Mike Fahey came down, probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Anyway, that's the history of those offices. We also, in the 90s, opened an office in Chicago, and then we were successful in Chicago, so Ted allowed ZGF, an architectural firm, to convince him that we needed an LA office, and they'd give us all their work. So that didn't go that far, and then when Keyspan took over, they didn't want us to have these offices where they didn't do business. So we wound up shuttering a lot of those branch offices. In the last 5 years, you all know, and you guys are testament because a lot of you are here, we reopened in Miami. We have in Aries here, we have a DC, Virginia office. We have an on-site office in St. Louis. And Brian is trying, with help from Dan, to make Chicago go. So a lot of places we were there and we left, and we get some sort of pushback when we go ahead and we go back, because they remember that we left them high and dry, which is not real good. But right now, all those offices are doing well, and we're trying to make them better and get going. We succeeded over the years because we have a niche. You all know it because you practice it every day. There are exceptions, but in general, we don't do hotels. We do an office building now and then. We don't do nuclear power plants. Some firms that we compete with will do anything. We don't. But we have a fulcrum, and it's healthcare. And it used to be our healthcare was the majority. But I would say academic and lab work is probably 50%, and healthcare is 50%. It changes, but basically that's where we are. There's a catch-22 in this business, and that is by doing only healthcare and only lab work, every one of you work on those 2 disciplines, projects, all the time. So you become proficient. All the people that work on making drawings and doing design know what a lab is or know how to design it. All trades. That's very valuable because, as we have on the bottom here, no client is going to hire you if you don't have any experience, and they don't want you to learn on their job. So that's how the haves get and the have-nots don't get, but that's how we've succeeded. So every time we go after a large hospital job or a large lab job or academic job against other engineers, we have more experience. There's no engineering firm in the United States that has done the amount of healthcare work we have done in the last 20 years. There's nobody that has like half a dozen billion-dollar hospitals that are either built or being designed. Just doesn't exist. Most of the national architects know that. That's why they come to us. That's why we get invited to go after work. That's why we have in-house arm wrestling over who should be involved and whose client is it, or which team should we go on. And then some architects they resent if we're on all the teams or some of the teams, but we have the unique privilege that we get invited. Sometimes we have to go scratch. Steve is doing a great job, our market business development, finding leads, but in general, that's been our niche. That's how we've made it work. For those of you old enough, and I think as Alan said, some of you weren't born when we started this firm, but Ted will understand this, and maybe some of you other older people might understand it. Our first client was Health Systems. They're defunct, but they used to develop medical office buildings Our first job was I Health Services in Weymouth, Mass. The building is still there. I went by it just a year or two ago. Maybe it's 10 or 15,000 square feet. We did it, the first job, I did the mechanical and drew it, and the plumbing, and I did that, and Arjun did the electrical. Our fee was $3,000 for it. Porter and Smith were an architectural firm in Newton, Mass. that we did a lot of work at Framingham Union Hospital. That it queued us up, so when Payette got the addition in late 70s, we were the engineer because we had been doing a little work with Porter and Smith. We did a lot of work in schools with Earl Flansburgh in the 70s, and it used to be historic how we never got paid. And we would tell everybody, but every engineer in town had the same problem. You work at Earl Flansburgh, you don't get paid. Poor Earl died a bunch of years ago, but that was a story in itself. We made friends with Hans Finney, who was from Scandinavia, a great guy. He worked with health systems, and that's how we got to do the concept and the design at St. Anne's Hospital in Fall River, $10 million job, Beverly Hospital, a whole bunch of little projects with Hans, but that gave us a portfolio in those days to go forward and get other work, including with Marcus, Nelka, and Payette. That's when Tom Payette was the junior partner. And our first job with them was the Fernald State School. We renovated a lot of ugly buildings, and including the Thom Hospital on the campus. ARC, I negotiated in a phone booth with Arthur Cohen in late 1975 to get a job at MIT, and I had to give him a lower fee than the other engineers gave him, even in those days. But we made the deal in a phone booth. Ted and I were inspecting some housing for a state agency here, and I had at a certain time I had to go to a phone booth. There were no cell phones. To call Arthur, he was waiting to hear what our number was. We got the job. That was our first MIT job. I say all that because MIT is our oldest continuous institutional client. Those of you who know we have the nanotech job under construction. You guys have done a great job on that. But we've been working at MIT for the last 40 years. So I think that's a great accomplishment of everyone in the room that we haven't burned the client. So we've been doing work there, some small. We've done many buildings. We've done many renovations. We've done lousy little crappy jobs. We've done nice jobs. But through all, we've survived at MIT for 40 years. I think that is amazing, amazing. We worked with before I go there, Hoskins Scott Taylor. We got a couple decent hospital jobs where we helped Hoskins Scott Taylor. They were a spin-off of TAC at the time. They spun off like in 1979 from TAC, the Architects Collaborative, which also is no longer in business. Ellenswagen Moore, Leslie Moore was Harry Ellenswagen's partner. Then they split, and our first job was the Merckert Chemistry Building at BC with Harry Ellenswagen. We were recommended by Higgins, J.C. Higgins, the contractor, to Jack Carl of Higgins, who then convinced his buddy, Nick Johnson's father, to talk to Harry Ellenswagen, us being the engineer. So sometimes it pays who you know. One of Ted's favorite architects, Donovan Sweeney. We did a bunch of police stations and fire. Joel knows all these jobs. We did a couple of fire stations and police stations. You know, that's not our niche, but then we didn't have a niche then. Soy Kobus, they spun off out of, Ed Soy came from Skidmore, and Rick Kobus walked away from Shepley, and they started in 1980. Our first work with them was at Brigham Women's. Shepley, we've been working for years. Davis and Brody, we started working with them out of New York because our friends at the Harvard planning office told them to use us on what was EQRF, which is now called, can't think of the guy's name, the guy that gave the money. Warren Alpert, sorry, yeah. And then we did him, and we've done a lot of work in New York with Davis and Brody. It was then later called Davis, Brody, and Bond. We did a lot of work with Perkins and Will. Perkins and Will Chicago is where we started. But we also got Greenwich Hospital because Jim Menadue, who is our client at Children's Hospital of Boston, relocated to Greenwich Hospital. And he told all the New York architects who were interviewing they had to use us. So Don Blair of Perkins and Will real quickly calls me up. And he says, Jim Menadue says that I should use you. Why should I use you? I said, because you won't get the job if you don't. So he used us. We also worked in the early days with SLAM. That's when Stecker, LeBeau, and Arneal were still alive. And it wasn't called SLAM. It was called Stecker, LeBeau, and Arneal. That's a little walk through early clients. Alan will tell you more about today's clients like MBJ and HOK and HKS and all the H's and the people we work with. We've done a good job in growing revenue. If you start on the bottom of this slide, in 1980, we did about $10 million worth of business. For a startup that started in 75, that's not bad. By 1990, and I round these off, it was like 18.9 million, but I'm calling it 20. By 2000, we were in the 30s. When we sold the Keyspan, we were doing 33 million a year. By 2005, we had it up to 35. In 2012, we hit 40 million for the first time. And last year, congratulations to all of you and your hard work, we eclipsed 50 million. So I think we have a success story. We've done well. It's all because of all of you and all of your hard work, including all the branch offices. Now we have a third and fourth niche, which is like protons. As I tell Mike Fahey, we could run a whole separate business that does nothing but protons. But we've been very fortunate to get to where we are, but I think we earned it, and we worked hard, and we care, and we try and take care of our clients. I'm going to turn it over to Alan to go and talk about the way forward and the business plan, but I thank you.